Ever feel like you just listen to something or read something and then it's just gone? Like you didn't even
Yeah.
learn anything. It's so frustrating.
It
I
is.
mean, like you go to a workshop, you listen to a podcast,
Right.
you read an article, and then poof,
Yeah.
it's gone. So
Like
today,
that never even happened.
exactly, like where did it go?
Uh,
So today we're going to deep dive into this framework,
Right.
and it's all about holding on to that knowledge that you're working so hard to gain.
I love that. It's like we're building a mental fortress or something
Yes, a mental
to
fortress.
protect those precious insights.
That's a great way to put it. And
Because let's face it,
Yeah.
information overload is a real thing these days. We're just bombarded with stuff constantly.
totally.
So how do we make sure the stuff that matters actually sticks?
Exactly.
Well, that's where this framework comes in.
Gagné's 9 events of instruction, right?
That's the one.
I have to admit, when I first saw 9 events, I thought, oh, this is going to be complicated.
Yeah, it sounds a little daunting at first, doesn't it?
It does. It really does.
But honestly, once you break it down,
Yeah.
it's actually very intuitive.
It really is. And you sent me some source material, and I
Yeah.
dug into it, and I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense.
Good, good.
Yeah.
It all comes back to Robert Gagné, this brilliant educational psychologist
Yeah.
who really understood how people learn best.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is how relevant his work still is today.
Yeah.
I mean, his
that's okay.
principles are everywhere you look, from online courses to
Yeah.
corporate training.
It's true. It's true.
Even museum exhibits are designed using these ideas.
That's so cool. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with event number 1,
Okay.
gain attention. And I feel like that one's pretty self-explanatory. But how do you go beyond just the initial, like, ooh, that's shiny,
Yeah.
to really get someone invested?
Well, think about it this way. Our brains are wired to filter out anything that doesn't seem important.
Right.
So to cut through all that noise,
Mm-hmm.
you need a hook. You need something that grabs the learner's attention
Yeah.
and makes them want to learn more.
So it has to be something that really resonates with them, right? Like something they actually...
Exactly. It has to connect to their interests,
No.
their goals,
Mm.
their existing knowledge, something that triggers their curiosity.
Yeah.
You know, one of the examples in our source material is a history teacher using a World War II documentary clip
Oh, yeah. That's a great example.
to engage students. Right. Imagine the difference between just hearing a bunch of dates and names versus seeing those powerful images and hearing those stories.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about tapping into the power of storytelling, of emotional engagement. And that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Because emotions make things memorable. They help us connect new information to what we already know.
That makes sense. Like it creates a stronger impression.
Exactly. Cognitive psychologists call this schema, these mental frameworks we build to organize information. And when you trigger an emotional response,
Right.
you're essentially making that new information stickier because it's now linked to something meaningful in the learner's schema.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot more to this than I initially thought. It's not just about being flashy or entertaining. It's about connecting with the learner
Right.
on a deeper level.
Exactly. And that's what makes learning truly effective.
Okay. You've definitely got my attention.
Good, good.
So what's next in this process?
So event 2 is inform learners of objectives.
Yeah.
Now, this might seem kind of basic,
Okay.
but stick with me here.
Okay.
Think about listening to a podcast. Don't you get more out of it when you know what to expect?
Oh, 100%. If a podcast is just all over the place, I get lost,
Right.
frustrated, and I tune out.
Exactly. And it's the same with learning. When you know the destination,
Yeah.
you can focus your attention and effort more effectively.
So it's like having a roadmap.
Precisely. And it can be as simple as a teacher saying, today we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations. That clear objective immediately sets the stage for why the information matters
Right.
and what students can expect to gain.
I'm starting to see how these steps build on each other.
Yes.
So we've hooked the learner's attention.
Right.
We've given them a map of where we're headed.
Yeah,
Now it's time to start building the knowledge itself.
you got it. But before we just dump a ton of new information on them,
Yeah.
Gagné emphasizes the importance of stimulating recall of prior knowledge.
Oh, I love this one. This is like, you can't build a house on a foundation of sand.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
We need to tap into what learners already know
Mm-hmm.
and make connections to the new information.
So instead of that new information just kind of floating around in their brain aimlessly,
Right.
it actually has somewhere to latch on to.
Exactly. And remember those schemas we talked about?
Yeah.
This step is all about activating those relevant schemas. So the new information has a framework to fit into.
So it's like building those bridges between the old and the new.
Exactly. And the more connections we can make,
Yeah.
the stronger and more durable those memories become. The source material gives the example of an English teacher reviewing basic sentence structure
Okay.
before introducing more complex grammar rules.
Right, so it's like a warm-up for the brain.
Exactly. It's
Yep.
like saying, hey, brain, remember this stuff. Now let's build on it.
Okay, the stage is set, the learners are primed and ready. Time for the main attraction. Present the content.
Here we go.
And I bet this is where things get really fun, right? Because there are so many ways to deliver information these days.
Absolutely. We've got lectures, videos, simulations, hands-on activities. The possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
The key is to choose methods that align with the content and the learners themselves.
Right, because different people learn in different ways, right? Some people are visual learners, some are more auditory, some need to get their hands dirty.
Exactly. That's why Gagné doesn't prescribe a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about finding the right tool for the job.
Makes sense. It's like you wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb, right?
Exactly.
So, like, what about hands-on activities?
Those are great for certain types of learners, especially those who learn best by doing.
Yeah.
Our source material talks about a science teacher explaining Newton's laws of motion using animations and real-life experiments.
Oh, that's cool.
Imagine building a little catapult to see those laws in action. Way more engaging than just reading about them in a textbook, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it's all about making it real and relevant for the learners.
Exactly. And that's when learning really comes alive.
I'm really starting to see how these pieces all fit together.
Good, good.
But even with the best content and the most engaging delivery, what happens when someone inevitably gets stuck? I mean, learning can be messy, right? We all hit those moments of, wait, what?
That's true. And that's where Event 5, Provide Learning Guidance, comes in. It's like having a safety net built right into the learning experience.
I like that. So this is where we offer extra explanations. Maybe break down complex concepts into smaller chunks, maybe offer some scaffolding.
Precisely. It's about providing the right kind of support at the right moment to help learners bridge those gaps in understanding.
I'm thinking about when I was learning to code. Having those early guided experiences really made me feel so much more confident when I eventually tackled projects on my own.
Absolutely. And that confidence is key for fostering a growth mindset, the belief that you can actually learn and master new skills.
That's so important.
It is. It's not about avoiding mistakes altogether. It's about viewing those mistakes as opportunities to learn and grow.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork.
Right.
We've presented the content in an engaging way.
Yep.
We've provided guidance along the way.
Yeah.
Now it's time for the learners to really flex those mental muscles, right?
You know it. Event 6 is elicit performance. This is where we shift from passive absorption to active application.
Okay, so this is where things like quizzes and projects and discussions.
Exactly. It's about giving learners a chance to use what they've learned, to put those new skills and knowledge into action. And it's important to create a safe space for them to experiment, make mistakes, get feedback.
Without feeling like the stakes are too high.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The source material talks about a language teacher having students role-play a conversation using newly learned vocabulary.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
It's so much more effective than just memorizing a list of words.
Oh, absolutely. It's about actually using the language.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But even with practice, we all need to know how we're doing.
Of course.
Right, that's where feedback comes in.
You got it. Event 7 is provide feedback. And it's crucial for helping learners understand their strengths, identify areas for improvement, and make adjustments along the way.
So it's not just about saying, good job, or you need to work on this.
Right.
It's about giving specific and actionable feedback.
Precisely. The source material gives an example of a writing instructor providing detailed feedback on a student's essay.
Okay.
It's about pointing out what's working well, highlighting areas that need more clarity, and offering suggestions for improvement.
But does feedback always have to come from the instructor or from an expert?
Not at all. Peer feedback can be incredibly valuable.
Oh, okay.
And so can self-reflection. Encouraging learners to critique their own work is crucial for developing those metacognitive skills.
Oh, interesting. So they're becoming more aware of their own learning process.
Exactly. It's about becoming more attuned to your own successes and struggles.
I love that. Okay, we've practiced, we've gotten feedback.
Right.
How do we really know if the learning has sunk in? Like if it's becoming part of their mental toolkit?
That's where Event 8 comes in. Assess performance. And I know what you're thinking, pop quizzes.
I was going to say it.
Yeah. But it doesn't have to be that way. Assessment can be a lot more creative and engaging than that.
Okay.
It's simply about checking for understanding,
Okay.
making sure the learning is taking root.
Yeah.
It can be as simple as asking learners to explain a concept to someone else
Okay.
or to use what they've learned to solve a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The source material mentions a business instructor using a case study analysis to assess students' problem-solving skills.
Okay.
So they're not just regurgitating information, they're actually applying it in a real-world scenario.
Oh, I like that. Because that's ultimately what we want, right? We want them to be able to use this knowledge in their lives.
Exactly. And that leads us to the final event, which is all about making that learning last.
Okay, this is the big one, right? This is what it's all about.
This is it. Event 9 is enhance retention and transfer.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
This is where we go beyond simply knowing something to actually being able to use it effectively.
Right.
It's about making that learning stick, about helping learners integrate it into their long-term memory and apply it flexibly across different situations.
Okay, that sounds amazing, but I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what that looks like in practice. What are some specific strategies for enhancing retention and transfer?
Well, one powerful technique is spaced repetition, which involves revisiting information at increasing intervals. Think of it like flashcards.
Oh, yeah, like flashcards.
You see a card, try to recall the answer, then you see it again a little later.
Right.
That spaced repetition helps strengthen those neural connections,
Yeah.
making it easier to retrieve the information later on.
That's really interesting. It's like working out a muscle, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're building those mental pathways
Yeah.
through repeated use. And another effective technique is elaborative interrogation.
Elaborative interrogation. That sounds intense.
It's simpler than it sounds. It just means asking why questions
Oh.
to deepen your understanding. Instead of just passively absorbing information,
Right.
you're actively challenging yourself to explain the underlying reasons and connections.
So it's about digging deeper, going beyond just the surface level.
Exactly. And it forces you to engage with the material on a much deeper level.
And that makes it more likely that you'll actually remember it.
Exactly. Our source material highlights a medical instructor using a simulation to train students on how to respond to an emergency situation.
Okay.
They're not just memorizing procedures,
Yeah.
they're understanding the reasoning behind them,
Yeah.
and they can adapt to different scenarios.
Yeah.
And that's the goal, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you can't use the knowledge,
Right.
what's the point?
Exactly. Gagné's final event gives us a framework for ensuring that the learning sticks.
I love it. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground with Gagné's 9 events. It's a really comprehensive framework for creating effective learning experiences. But before we wrap up this part of the episode, are there any other key takeaways you'd want to highlight for our listeners?
I think what's most important to remember is that these 9 events aren't just a checklist for instructors. They're really a framework that anyone can use to become a more effective learner. Whether you're taking a course, learning a new skill online, or just trying to wrap your head around a complex topic.
Yeah.
These principles can help you get more out of every learning experience.
So even if I'm not designing a lesson plan or a training program, I can still apply these ideas to my own personal learning.
Absolutely. Let's say you're trying to learn a new language.
Yeah.
You can start by finding a podcast or a YouTube channel that really grabs your attention.
Okay.
That's your gain attention event right there.
Yeah.
Then set a clear goal for yourself, like being able to hold a basic conversation within 3 months that's inform learners of objectives.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Then you might brush up on some basic grammar rules that you already know.
Yeah.
Stimulate recall of prior knowledge.
Yeah.
And then you could find a language learning app,
Right.
or maybe you get a tutor online that's present the content.
And then the real test, I force myself to have those early conversations.
Exactly. Elicit performance. And you'll hopefully get some gentle, constructive feedback along the way that's provide feedback.
Makes sense.
And to really make sure that new knowledge sticks, you might use flashcards or spaced repetition to review vocabulary. Maybe even watch movies or read books in your target language.
That's a good idea.
That's a fun way to apply your learning.
Yeah, for sure. That actually makes me feel a lot more excited about tackling that language learning goal I've been putting off for ages.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
That's the power of a framework like this. It takes the mystery out of learning and gives you a clear path to follow.
You know, when we were prepping for this episode, we
Yeah.
talked about some of the criticisms of Gagné's model.
Right.
Some people argue that it's too linear, too rigid,
Yeah.
that it doesn't really account for the messiness of how we learn in the real world.
It's a fair point.
Yeah.
Learning isn't always a perfectly sequenced,
Right.
step-by-step process.
Yeah.
Sometimes we jump
Oh,
around,
totally.
we make unexpected connections, we
Right.
stumble, we backtrack.
It's true.
But I think it's more helpful to see Gagné's model as a flexible framework.
Okay, so more like guidelines than strict rules.
Exactly. The key is to use the framework thoughtfully, adapting it to the specific context and the needs of the learner.
That makes a lot of sense. And honestly,
Yeah.
even acknowledging those criticisms can be a valuable learning experience in itself.
Absolutely. It encourages us to think critically
Right.
about the model,
Yeah.
to consider its strengths and limitations,
Yeah.
and to use it in a way that works best for us.
Okay, so we've explored Gagné's 9 events in depth.
We have?
We've talked about how they can be applied in different contexts.
Yeah.
And we've even acknowledged some of the criticisms of the model.
Mm-hmm.
But before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I have one final question for you.
Okay, shoot.
What's one key takeaway,
Okay.
one nugget of wisdom that you really hope our listeners will walk away with from this part of the episode?
I think the most important thing to remember is that learning isn't something that just happens to us.
Hmm.
It's a process that we can actively shape and influence. And by understanding these principles of effective learning,
Yeah.
we can become more intentional, more engaged,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately more successful learners.
That's such a powerful message. It's a reminder that we're all capable of lifelong learning and growth.
Exactly. No matter what we're trying to learn,
Yeah.
whether it's a new language, a complex skill,
Mm-hmm.
or just a deeper understanding of the world,
Yeah.
there are tools and strategies that can help us on that journey.
I love that. Well said. This has been such an insightful exploration of Gagné's 9 events. I know I'll be thinking about these principles every time I start learning something new.
Me too. And I encourage our listeners to do the same. Experiment with these ideas, see how they work for you,
Yeah.
and most importantly, embrace the joy of lifelong learning.
I love that. That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time
Sounds good.
for another insightful exploration of the ideas that shape our world.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so we covered the first 4 events, getting learners engaged and ready to learn.
Right.
Now I'm really curious to dig into like the more hands-on part of Gagné's model.
Yeah, let's get practical.
Yeah, so what's next?
Well, we've talked about how important it is to engage learners, set clear objectives,
Uh-huh.
and activate their prior knowledge, right?
Right.
But even with the best preparation,
Yeah.
learners are going to run into challenges.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They're going to get stuck.
Definitely.
That's where Event 5 comes in. Provide learning guidance.
Okay, so this is where we roll up our sleeves and really offer support, right?
Exactly. It's all about creating a supportive learning environment.
Okay, but I'm wondering, what makes for really effective guidance? Is it just about answering questions and clearing up confusing points?
Well, it's definitely part of it,
Yeah.
but there's a bit of an art to it.
Okay.
You know, you want to empower learners,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't want to just give them all the answers.
Right, you don't want to make them feel like they're being handheld the whole time.
Exactly. Think about when you were learning to ride a bike.
Oh, okay.
Remember how someone ran alongside you, holding the seat at first?
Oh, yeah, totally.
This gave you the confidence to try, right?
It did.
But eventually they let go,
Mm-hmm.
and you were able to find your balance on your own.
That's a great analogy. It's all about scaffolding, right? Providing that support at first,
Exactly. Scaffolding.
and then gradually letting go as the learner gains confidence.
You got it. And what I love about Gagné's model is that it really emphasizes the importance of tailoring that guidance to each learner's needs.
Oh, okay. So some learners might need more explicit instructions.
Exactly. While others might thrive with a more hands-off, exploratory approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not one size fits all.
Not at all. And the goal is to help learners develop that self-sufficiency.
Right, so they can eventually fly on their own.
Precisely.
Our source material mentions the example of a programming instructor providing step-by-step guidance on writing a Python script
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
before letting students code independently. And I can really relate to that. I remember when I was first learning to code, having those early guided experiences really made me feel so much more confident when I eventually tackled projects on my own.
Absolutely. And that confidence is crucial for fostering a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm. So
The
important.
belief that you can actually learn and master new skills, that you can improve with effort and practice.
It's about embracing the challenges.
Exactly. It's not about avoiding mistakes altogether.
Right.
It's about seeing those mistakes as opportunities to learn and grow.
Okay, so we've provided the support, the guidance, the safe space to experiment and maybe make a few mistakes along the way.
Exactly.
Now it's time for the learners to really put those new skills into practice, right?
You got it. Event 6 is elicit performance.
Okay, bring it on.
This is where we shift from passive absorption to active application.
Show me what you got.
Exactly. It's about giving learners opportunities to demonstrate their understanding, to experiment with their new knowledge,
Yeah.
to receive feedback on their progress.
So this is where things like projects and presentations, role-playing.
Absolutely. It's all about finding creative and engaging ways for learners to apply what they've learned
Yeah.
in a meaningful way.
And it's going to be relevant to them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The more relevant and authentic the task,
Yeah.
the more engaged learners will be.
Think about learning a new language.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's one thing to memorize verb conjugations.
Right.
It's a whole other thing to actually have a conversation.
Exactly. And that's where the real learning happens.
Right. When you're actually using the language.
Precisely. And the source material gives the example of a language teacher having students role-play a conversation using their newly learned vocabulary.
Oh, yeah. I can see how that would be a lot more fun and engaging than just filling out worksheets.
For sure.
Yeah.
But this principle applies to all sorts of learning.
Okay.
Imagine aspiring entrepreneurs pitching their business ideas to a panel of investors,
Oh, that's a great idea.
or medical students working through a simulated emergency room scenario.
Ooh, high stakes.
Exactly. And what's great about these types of activities is that they not only help solidify learning, they also often reveal those gaps in understanding.
Right, those aha moments.
Precisely. Where you realize, oh, maybe I don't know this as well as I thought I did.
It's like when you try to explain something to someone else and you're like,
Yeah,
wait a minute.
I don't even understand this myself.
Exactly. And then you're both learning.
That's right.
Yeah.
And those moments can be really valuable learning opportunities.
Yeah, for sure.
And they lead perfectly into our next event, provide feedback.
Okay. Feedback time.
Because once learners have put in the effort,
Yeah.
they need to know how they're doing,
Right.
what they're doing well, and where they can improve.
Feedback is so important, but I think it can also be tricky, right? Like, we all want to be encouraged and supported,
Of course.
but we also need to hear honest, constructive criticism if we want to grow.
You're absolutely right. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
Effective feedback is both affirming and redirecting.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
about recognizing what's working well and offering specific, actionable suggestions for improvement.
So it's not just about saying good job or you need to work on this.
Right.
It's about giving feedback that's actually helpful and that can be used to make real progress.
Exactly. The source material gives an example of a writing instructor providing detailed feedback on a student's essay.
Okay.
Imagine those handwritten notes in the margins, pointing out strong arguments,
Yeah.
highlighting areas that need more clarity, suggesting ways to improve the flow and structure.
Yeah, I remember those days. But does feedback always have to come from an instructor or like an expert?
Not at all. Peer feedback can be incredibly valuable,
Oh, okay.
especially when learners are working together on projects.
Right. They can learn from each other.
Exactly. And don't forget about self-reflection.
Oh, yeah, that's important too.
Encouraging learners to critique their own work,
Yeah.
to identify their own strengths and weaknesses. That's crucial for developing those metacognitive skills we talked about earlier.
Right, that awareness of their own learning process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about receiving feedback. It's also about becoming more attuned to your own learning journey.
I love that. So we've practiced.
Right.
We've gotten feedback.
Yeah.
But how do we know for sure if the learning has really taken root? Like, how do we assess whether someone has truly mastered something?
That's where Event 8 comes in. Assess
Yeah.
performance.
Okay, assessment time.
Well, don't worry. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be all about pop quizzes and exams.
Oh, goodness.
It's really about creating opportunities for learners to demonstrate their understanding
Okay.
and for us to gauge the effectiveness of the learning experience.
So this could involve things like presentations, projects, essays,
Absolutely.
even just explaining a concept in simple terms.
Exactly. Like explaining to your grandmother.
Oh, yeah, the grandmother test.
The ultimate test.
Yeah.
Can you explain it in a way that anyone can understand?
Right. That's a good sign that you really get it.
Exactly. The goal is to move beyond just rote memorization and surface level understanding to really assess whether learners can apply what they've learned in a meaningful way.
Okay, so it's about making sure the learning is actually transferable to real-world situations.
Precisely. The source material talks about a business instructor using a case study analysis to assess students' problem-solving skills.
Okay, I like that.
So they're given a real-world business problem, and they
Yeah.
have to use the concepts they've learned to analyze the situation,
Right.
propose solutions,
Yeah.
and then defend their recommendations.
Okay, so it's about thinking critically
It's
and
a,
applying that knowledge in a way that's actually relevant to their future careers.
you got it. And I think this highlights a key theme in Gagné's model,
Hmm.
pushing learners beyond their comfort zones,
Um,
encouraging them to think critically and apply what they've learned in increasingly complex and challenging ways.
right, because that's how we really grow, right? By
Ah,
stretching ourselves.
absolutely. Okay, so we've come to the final event,
This is it, the grand finale.
the climax. And it's all about making that learning last.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's what it's all been leading up to, right? We want this learning to stick.
Exactly. Event 9 is enhanced retention and transfer. It's about making sure that the learning doesn't just fade away
Yeah.
after the course or the workshop is over.
Right, like we talked about at the beginning, we don't want it to just evaporate.
Exactly. We want this knowledge to become a part of the learner's long-term memory
Yeah.
and to be something that they can use flexibly in a variety of situations.
Okay, this is huge, but I have to admit, I'm
Mhm.
still a little unclear on what that actually looks like in practice.
Yeah.
What are some specific strategies for enhancing retention and transfer?
Well, one really powerful technique is spaced repetition.
Okay, I've heard of that. Remind me how that works again.
It involves revisiting information at increasing intervals.
Oh, okay.
So you might review something a day later,
Yeah.
then a week later,
Yeah.
then a month later, and so on.
So it's about spacing out the review sessions.
Exactly. And that spaced repetition helps strengthen those neural connections,
Right.
making it easier to recall the information later on. Think about how flashcards work.
Okay.
You see a card,
Mm-hmm.
try to recall the answer, then you see it again a little later.
Right.
That spaced repetition helps solidify those memories.
That makes sense. It's like giving your brain a little workout.
Exactly. You're building those mental muscles through repeated exposure. Another really effective technique is called elaborative interrogation.
Elaborative interrogation. That sounds intense.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. It's really just about asking why questions
Okay.
to deepen your understanding.
So instead of just passively taking in the information,
Right.
I'm actively challenging myself to understand the reasons behind it.
Exactly. And it forces you to engage with the material on a much deeper level.
So it's about making connections.
Exactly. Connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture.
Okay, I like that. In our source material, they talk about a medical instructor using a simulation to train students on how to respond to an emergency situation.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
And that seems like a really powerful way to enhance both retention and transfer.
Absolutely. They're not just memorizing procedures in a classroom.
Right.
They're actually applying what they've learned in a realistic,
Yeah.
high-pressure situation.
Okay, so it's about making the learning come alive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Connecting it to real-world experiences and challenges.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground with Gagné's 9 events.
We have.
It's such a comprehensive framework for creating truly effective learning experiences.
It really is.
But before we wrap up this part of the episode, are there any other key takeaways you'd want to highlight for our listeners? So we talked about how Gagné's model can be kind of seen as too rigid,
Right.
but I think what really stands out to me is that it's not just for instructors, it's for learners too.
Oh, absolutely. It's a framework for anyone who wants to learn more effectively. Whether you're taking a formal course, learning a new skill online,
Mm-hmm.
or just trying to wrap your head around a complex topic,
Yeah.
these principles can really make a difference.
So even if I'm not like designing a lesson plan,
Right.
I can still use these ideas to boost my own learning.
Absolutely. Let's say you're trying to learn a new language.
Okay, yeah.
You could start by finding a podcast or a YouTube channel that really grabs your attention.
Right.
That's your gain attention event right there.
Okay, so start with something fun and engaging.
Exactly. Then you set a clear goal for yourself, like being able to hold a basic conversation in 3 months.
Okay.
That's inform learners of objectives.
So I'm setting myself up for success.
Exactly. You're giving yourself a roadmap, a destination to aim for.
I like it.
And then you might brush up on some basic grammar rules that you already know
Mm-hmm.
that stimulate recall of prior knowledge.
Okay, so I'm activating that prior knowledge.
Exactly. You're building on what you already know.
Okay, then what?
Then you could dive into a language learning app or find a tutor online.
Okay.
That's your present the content phase.
Right, finding those resources and materials.
And of course, you're going to run into challenges along the way.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So that's where provide learning guidance comes in. Maybe you join a language exchange group or Find a conversation partner.
Oh, okay, so find some support.
Exactly. Surround yourself with people who can help you along the way.
That makes sense. And then the real test, I force myself to actually speak the language.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
illicit performance. You got to get out there and use those new skills.
Right, even if it's a little scary at first.
It can be intimidating,
Right.
but that's where the real learning happens.
And hopefully I'll get some constructive feedback along the way.
Exactly. Provide feedback is crucial for growth.
So I know what to work on.
And then to really make sure that new knowledge sticks, you might use flashcards or spaced repetition to review vocabulary.
Okay, so keep practicing and reinforcing those new concepts.
Exactly. And to make it even more fun, try watching movies or reading books in your target language.
Oh, that's a great idea. I love
This is
that.
a great way to immerse yourself in the language and culture.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, this actually makes me way more excited about finally tackling that language learning goal.
I'm glad to hear it. That's what we want. We want to empower people to become lifelong learners.
Exactly.
And Gagné's model gives us a framework for doing just that.
So, we talked about some criticisms of Gagné's model, like some folks think it's too linear, too rigid. What do you think about that?
Well, it's true that learning isn't always a perfectly sequenced,
Right.
step-by-step process.
Yeah, things can get messy.
It can. Sometimes we jump around, we make unexpected connections, we
Yeah.
stumble, we backtrack. That's all part of the process.
It's true.
But I think it's more helpful to see Gagné's model as a flexible framework, a set of guidelines.
Okay, so not a strict set of rules.
Exactly. It's about adapting these principles to the specific context and needs of the learner.
And I think even just being aware of those criticisms is valuable, right?
Oh, absolutely. It encourages us to think critically about the model,
Hmm.
to consider its strengths and limitations, and to use it in a way that works best for us.
It's about being mindful, not mindless.
Exactly. So we've explored Gagné's 9 events in depth.
Yeah.
We've talked about how they can be applied in all sorts of contexts, and
Mm.
we've even addressed some of the criticisms of the model.
Right, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. What stands out to you the most?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that learning isn't something that just happens to us.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we can actively control and shape. By understanding these principles of effective learning,
Yeah.
we can become more intentional,
Right.
more engaged, and ultimately more successful learners.
I love that. That's the heart of it, really. We're all capable of lifelong learning and growth.
And Gagné's model gives us the tools to make that happen.
It does. It takes the mystery out of learning
Mm.
and gives us a clear path to follow.
Well said. This has been such a fascinating deep dive into Gagné's 9 events.
It has.
I know I'm going to be thinking about these principles every time I set out to learn something new.
Me too. And I encourage our listeners to do the same. Experiment with these ideas, see how they work for you, and most importantly, embrace the joy of lifelong learning.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another insightful exploration of the ideas that shape our world.
Until next time.